the forgotten grain that fed Amish families through the Great Depression. If you want the exact system Amish families use to build real food security in their own backyard, I put the complete free blueprint at growyourground.netlify.app. Grab it right now, it's free, and it connects directly to everything in this video. Link is right there. There is a grain sitting forgotten in seed catalogs right now that once kept entire Amish communities fed while the rest of the country stood in bread lines. It grows faster than wheat. It survives soil that wheat can't touch. And somehow, in less than 100 years, almost every American forgot it ever existed. And before we go further, if stories like this one are new to you, hit subscribe now. We post real practical Amish and homestead food wisdom every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's talk about buckwheat, not the cereal box kind. Real buckwheat, grown the way it was grown before industrial agriculture decided wheat was the only grain worth mass producing. And here's the first thing that should surprise you. Buckwheat isn't even technically a grain. It's a seed related to rhubarb and sorrel, which is exactly why it thrives in conditions that would destroy an actual wheat crop. During the Great Depression, when cash was scarce and store-bought flour was a luxury many families simply couldn't afford, Amish households across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana leaned hard on buckwheat, not because it was trendy, because it worked when nothing else did. Here's the number that changes how you look at this plant completely. Buckwheat can reach harvest in as little as 70 to 80 days. Wheat typically needs somewhere between 120 and 150 days, depending on the variety and your climate. That difference isn't small. That's an entire extra growing cycle you can fit into a single season. Think about what that meant for a family with almost no financial cushion. If a late frost wiped out a spring planting, there wasn't time to start wheat over and still get a harvest before winter. But buckwheat could be replanted and it would still mature before the first hard freeze. It was the crop that gave families a second chance when the season had already gone wrong. That kind of forgiveness is rare in farming. Most crops punish you for a late start. Buckwheat doesn't. There's a soil story here too, and it's one most modern gardeners have never been taught. Wheat is demanding. It wants rich, well-managed soil, consistent fertility, and careful attention to nutrient levels or your yield collapses. Buckwheat doesn't ask for any of that. It actually thrives in poor, marginal, even depleted soil that would produce almost nothing if you tried to grow wheat there instead. Amish farmers working rocky hillsides and thin topsoil understood this instinctively. You don't force the land to be something it isn't. You find the crop that already wants to grow there. And on land too poor for wheat, buckwheat quietly became the difference between a family eating through winter and a family going without. Now here's something almost nobody knows about buckwheat, and it might be the most important detail in this entire story. It doesn't just tolerate poor soil, it actively improves it. Buckwheat has a root system that pulls phosphorus out of the ground in a form other plants can't access on their own, and when the plant is turned back into the soil at the end of the season, that phosphorus becomes available for whatever you plant next. Amish farmers used it as what's called a cover crop between main plantings for exactly this reason. Grow it, harvest what you need till the rest back in, and your soil comes back stronger than when you started. That's not a modern gardening trend. That's over a century of quiet, practical knowledge passed down without a single YouTube video or gardening blog to explain it. Just families who paid attention to what actually worked year after year and repeated it because it did. Compare that to wheat, which pulls nutrients out of the soil and gives almost nothing back. Grow wheat in the same spot season after season without careful crop rotation, and your soil quality steadily declines. Buckwheat does the opposite. It's one of the only crops that leaves your ground better off than it found it. Let's talk about water, because this is where buckwheat really separates itself from nearly every other grain crop grown in America. Wheat needs consistent moisture through its growing cycle, and a drought at the wrong moment can devastate an entire harvest. Buckwheat is remarkably drought-tolerant once established. It doesn't need irrigation systems, doesn't need careful watering schedules. During the Dust Bowl years, when drought was crushing farms across huge parts of the country, buckwheat kept quietly producing in gardens and small fields where wheat simply gave up. That resilience is exactly why Amish families held on to it long after mainstream American agriculture had moved almost entirely to wheat and corn. There's a pollinator story buried in here too, and it's one that connects directly to something every home gardener actually cares about. Buckwheat flowers are a magnet for bees, not a mild attraction, an intense one. Beekeepers have used buckwheat fields for generations, specifically because the honey it produces is darker, richer, and more mineral-heavy than clover honey, with a flavor almost nobody forgets once they've tasted it. Amish apiaries have relied on buckwheat plantings for exactly this reason, timing their buckwheat fields to bloom right when their bee colonies need the most support. It's not just food for the family, it's food for the bees that make food for the family. A closed loop. If systems like that appeal to you, that same closed-loop thinking, crops that feed you, feed your soil, and feed everything growing around them, is exactly what's laid out inside the free guide at growyourground.netlify.app. It's free right now, and it's worth 10 minutes of your time before this video ends. So if buckwheat is this resilient, this forgiving, this good for the soil, and this fast to harvest, why did it almost completely disappear from American tables? The honest answer involves the same industrial shift that buried the Jerusalem artichoke. Wheat scaled. Wheat milled easily into the fine white flour that factories wanted, that grocery stores wanted, that a rapidly urbanizing America wanted. Buckwheat flour is darker, denser, and behaves differently in baking. It didn't fit neatly into the white bread era. There's a cultural piece too. As rural families moved to cities, as fewer people grew their own food, the practical knowledge of working with buckwheat simply had nowhere left to live. You can't pass down growing wisdom to a generation that never touches soil. Within 2 generations, most American families had genuinely forgotten this grain existed. Amish communities never made that move to the city. They stayed rooted, literally and figuratively, in the land and the knowledge that came with it. While buckwheat quietly vanished from the American mainstream, it kept showing up in Amish kitchens, Amish fields, and Amish cover crop rotations, exactly the way it always had. Let's get into what buckwheat actually tastes like, because it deserves a fair hearing here. It has a distinct, nutty, slightly earthy flavor, noticeably different from wheat, which is exactly why it never disappeared from Amish kitchens, even as it vanished everywhere else. Traditional buckwheat pancakes are a dish still served today. It shows up in savory dishes too. Buckwheat groats, sometimes called kasha, can be cooked almost exactly like rice, and Amish families have used it in porridges, in stuffing, mixed into soups for extra body and nutrition. It's remarkably versatile for a crop most Americans couldn't identify. Nutritionally, it holds up better than most people expect. Buckwheat is naturally gluten-free, which matters enormously more today than it did a century ago, and it carries a complete protein profile that's actually unusual for something from the plant world. It's rich in rutin, a compound linked to healthy blood vessel function, and it digests more slowly than wheat, meaning it doesn't spike blood sugar the same aggressive way refined wheat flour does. None of that was marketed knowledge. It was just what worked. Here's a detail that connects everything we've covered. Buckwheat doesn't just grow fast and tolerate poor soil. It actively suppresses weeds. It germinates quickly, canopies over aggressively, and shades out competition before most weeds even get established. It's a natural weed control method. Think about what that actually solves for a family working the land, without heavy machinery, without chemical herbicides, relying almost entirely on hand tools and hard work. A crop that feeds you, feeds your soil, feeds your bees, and fights your weeds for you, all at the same time. That's why it survived. Let's talk about how a modern family, with a modest backyard and no farming background at all, could actually grow this. Buckwheat needs almost nothing to get started. Loosen the soil, scatter the seed, rake it in lightly, and keep it modestly watered until it germinates, which typically takes just a handful of days. From there, it largely takes care of itself. No staking, no trellising, no complicated pest management. Within roughly 10 to 12 weeks, you're harvesting. For a small family bed, even a modest planting can produce a meaningful amount of buckwheat groats. And because the growing cycle is so short, many gardeners plant it twice in a single season. Once in early summer, once again after the first harvest, doubling the yield from the exact same patch of ground. Compare that flexibility to wheat. Buckwheat gives you a second chance built directly into its own biology. Now here's where this story circles back to why any of it matters to you. We are in a completely different economic reality, but one that's straining household budgets in its own very real way. Flour prices have climbed steadily. Supply chains are vulnerable to weather and fuel costs. A crop you can grow, harvest, and mill yourself in your own backyard removes you from that entire equation. Amish families never needed a crisis to remind them of that. They were quietly insulated from whatever chaos was unfolding in the wider economy. Let's bring this story to where it really matters. Two crops now, the Jerusalem artichoke and buckwheat, both nearly erased, both still quietly thriving in Amish fields. That's really the entire secret, not some mystical, old-world wisdom. Just a refusal to abandon proven, resilient food sources for the sake of convenience. There's a lesson in that stubbornness that goes far beyond gardening. It's about trusting what has been tested by time over what's simply been marketed the loudest. It's about choosing resilience over convenience. Real food security was always about choosing the right crops and committing to them. If this story has changed how you're looking at that empty patch of yard, that's exactly the point. You don't need Amish land. You need a starting point and a system that actually tells you what to do next. That system is sitting at growyourground.netlify.app, completely free. Go get it before you close this video. Before we wrap up, there's one more piece. Buckwheat and Jerusalem artichokes are just two threads in a much larger pattern of forgotten, resilient crops. There are root vegetables, legumes, and preservation methods most modern households have never even been exposed to. That's exactly what we're covering next. The 3-month pantry system Amish families build every single year, without a single can of store-bought food. If today's story showed you how much has been forgotten, that one is going to show you how to actually get it back. Grow what actually works, not what's trending. That's the whole lesson. If you want more stories like this, real, practical, and rooted in the way resilient growers have actually fed their families for generations, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. We're just getting started, and what's coming next might completely change how you think about your own kitchen.